Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I'm reading Wild at Heart this morning. I told you guys that I was going to read to you guys from this one. There's a big thing that is happening right now in this country, and that is that men are starting to wake up, and this has been a big part of it. This was written 17 years ago, in 2001, is when it was originally released. This is going to be kind of a longer one, but the subject is more serious than a lot of the topics that we've been addressing. And of course, I've been including you guys in my growth. I've been including you guys in my quest for answers. There's a lot of tragedy right now happening in this country. And this is the second Christian book that I've read this year that I've really enjoyed. The first was Crash by Erwin Raphael McManus. The second is Wild at Heart. And this has been absolutely phenomenal. So this is from the chapter called The Battle for a Man's Heart. And this is about raising young boys, raising young girls, and about what it means to be a little boy here. And this is going to be a story that is going to be very polarizing. Not everybody is going to be behind this, because it's going to shatter some illusions that we're operating with about what it means to be a young boy right now. Because right now, we're not doing a great job turning boys into men. Okay, here we go. A few years ago now, my middle son, Blaine, made the big transition into first grade. That's a huge step for a child, leaving the comfort and safety of mom's side. Spending all day at school, being among the big kids, but Blaine's a very outgoing and winsome boy. A born leader, and we knew he'd handle it swimmingly. Every night at the dinner table, he regaled us with tales of the day's adventure. It was fun to recall him with joys of those early school days. A shiny new lunchbox, brand new yellow number 2 pencils, a box of Crayolas with a built-in sharpener, a new desk with new friends. We heard all about his new teacher, gym class, what they played at recess, and now he was emerging as a leader in all the games. But then, one day, he was silent. "What's wrong, Tiger?" I asked. He wouldn't even look up. What happened? He didn't want to talk about it. And then finally the story came out. A bully. Some first grade poser had pushed him down on the playground in front of all of his friends. Tears were streaming down his cheeks as he told us the story. "Blaine, look at me." He raised his tearful eyes slowly, reluctantly. There was shame written all over his face. "I want you to listen very closely to what I am about to say. The next time that this bully pushes you down, here is what I want you to do. Are you listening, Blaine?" He nodded, his big wet eyes fixed on mine. "I want you to get up, and I want you to hit him as hard as you possibly can." A look of embarrassed delight came over Blaine's face, and then he smiled. Good Lord, why did I give him such advice? And why was he delighted with it? Why are some of you delighted with it, while others are appalled? Yes, I know that Jesus told us to turn the other cheek, but have we really misused that verse? But we have really misused that verse. You cannot teach a boy to use his strength by stripping him of it. Jesus was able to retaliate, believe me, but he chose not to. And yet we suggest that a boy who is mocked, shamed before his fellows, stripped of all the power and dignity, should stay in that beaten place because Jesus wants him there? You will emasculate him for life. From that point on, he will be passive and fearful. He will grow up never knowing how to stand his ground, never knowing if he is a man indeed. Oh yes, he'll be courteous, sweet even, deferential, minding all of his manners. It may look moral, it may look like turning the other cheek, but it is merely weakness. You cannot turn a cheek you do not have. Our churches are full of such men. At that moment, Blaine's soul was hanging there in the balance. Then the fire came back into his eyes and the shame disappeared. For many, many men lose their souls, still hang in the balance, because no one has ever invited them to be dangerous. No one has ever invited them to be dangerous, to know their strength, to discover that they have what it takes. I feel there's a stormy ocean inside me, and I keep trying to make those waters calm and placid, confessed a young friend in his early 20s. I would love to be dangerous, he said, sighing. You mean it's possible? I feel like I have to ask permission. Why on earth would a young man have to ask permission to be a man? Because the assault continues long after the wound has been given. I don't mean to create the wrong impression, A man is not wounded once, but many, many times in the course of his life. Nearly every blow ends up falling in the same place, against his strength. Life takes it away, one verbatim at a time, until in the end, he has no spine at all. I read a case a few years ago about a baby boy who suffered a terrible blow during a surgery. His penis was accidentally removed. The event took place back in the 70s, and a decision was made that reflected the widely held belief that sex roles are not truly a part of our design, but merely shaped by our culture and therefore interchangeable. His genitalia were reconstructed into female form, and he was raised as a girl. That story is a parable for our times. It is exactly what we've tried to do to our boys, starting from when they are very young. As Christina Hoff Sommers says in her book, The War Against Boys, it's a bad time to be a boy in America. Our culture has turned against the masculine essence, aiming to cut it off early. As one example, she points to the way in which is the shootings at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. They are being used against boys in general. Most of you will remember the tragic story from April 1999. 2 boys walked into the school library and began shooting. When it was all over, 13 victims and their 2 assailants were dead. Sommers is alarmed about the remarks of William Pollock, director of the Center for Men at the McLean Hospital, and so am I. Here's what he said. The boys in Littleton are the tip of the iceberg, and that iceberg is all boys. The idea widely held in our culture is that the aggressive nature of boys is inherently bad, and we have to make them into something more like girls. The primary tool for that operation is our public school system. The average school teacher faces an incredible challenge to bring order to a room of boys and girls and promote learning. The main obstacle of that noble goal is getting the boys to sit still, keep quiet, and pay attention for an entire day. You might as well hold back the tide. That's not the way that a boy is wired, and it's not the way that a boy learns. Rather than changing the way that we do male education, we try to change males. As Lionel Tiger reports in his book, The Decline of Males, boys are 3 to 4 times more likely than girls to be diagnosed as suffering from attention deficit disorder, ADD. But maybe they're not sick. Maybe, as Tiger says, they may simply mean that they enjoy large muscle movements and assertive actions. Boys as a group appear to prefer relatively boisterous and mobile activities to the sedate and physically restricted behavior that school systems reward and to which girls seem to be more inclined. End quote. Tell me about it. This guy ought to come over to my house for dinner. With 3 boys at the table and 1 man with a boyish heart, things get pretty wild at times. Chairs are, for the most part, they're optional. The boys use them like gymnastic equipment more than restraints. Just the other night, I look over to see Blaine balancing across his chair on his stomach, like an acrobat. At the same moment, Luke, our youngest, is nowhere to be seen, or rather, in the place of the table where his head should be, we see only a pair of socks pointing straight up. My wife rolls her eyes. But not our school systems. As Tiger says, at least 3 to 4 times as many boys than girls are essentially defined as ill because their preferred patterns of play don't fit easily into the structure of school. Well-meaning psychomanagers then prescribe tranquilizing drugs for ADD such as Ritalin. The situation is scandalous. The use of drugs so disproportionately among boys betrays the failure of school authorities to understand sex differences. The only disease these boys may have is being male. But it's not just the schools. Many of them, by the way, are doing a heroic job. How about our churches? A young man recently came to me very angry and distraught. He was frustrated at the way that his father, a church leader, was coaching him in sports. He plays as a basketball player, and his team had made the city finals. That night of the big game, as he was heading out the door, his father literally stopped him and said, "Now, don't go out there and kick butt. That's just not the nice thing to do." I'm not making this up. What a ridiculous thing to say to a 17-year-old athlete. Go out there and give them, well, don't give them anything. Just be nice. Be the nicest guy on the opposing team that they've ever met. In other words, be soft. That is the perfect example of what the church tells men. Someone I read said the church may have a masculine exterior, but its soul has turned feminine. Emasculation happens in marriage as well. Women are often attracted to the wilder side of a man, but once having caught him, they settle down to the task of domesticating him. Ironically, if he gives in, he'll resent her for it, and she in turn will wonder where the passion has gone. Most marriages wind up there. A weary and lonely woman asked me the other day, "How do I get my husband to come alive?" "Invite him to be dangerous," I said. "You mean I should let him get the motorcycle, right?" "Yep." She shrank back, disappointment on her face. "I know you're right, but I hate the idea. I've made him tame for years." Think back to that great big lion in that tiny cage. Why should we put a man in a cage? For the same reason that we put a lion there. For the same reason we put God in there. He's dangerous. To paraphrase Sayers, we've also paired the claws of the lion cub of Judah. A man is a dangerous thing. Women don't start wars. Violent crimes aren't for the most part committed by women. Our prisons aren't filled with women. Columbine wasn't the work of two young girls. Obviously, something has gone wrong in the masculine soul. And the way that we have decided to handle it is to take that dangerous nature away entirely. We know that our society produces a plentiful supply of boys, says Robert Bly, but seems to produce fewer and fewer men. There's two simple reasons. We don't know how to initiate boys into men, and second, we're not sure that we really want to. We want to socialize them, to be sure, but away from all that is fierce and wild and passionate. In other words, away from masculinity and towards something more feminine. But as Summers says, we have forgotten a simple truth. The energy, competitiveness, and corporal daring of normal, decent males is responsible for much of what is right in the world. Summers reminds us that during the Columbine massacre, Seth Huey threw his body over a terrified girl to shield her from bullets. 15-year-old Daniel Rohrbaugh paid with his life when, at mortal risk to himself, he held the door open so that others could escape. That strength, so essential to men, is also what makes them heroes. If a neighborhood is safe, it's because of the strength of men. Slavery was stopped by the strength of men at a terrible price to them and their families. Nazis were stopped by men. Apartheid wasn't defeated by women who gave their seats up on lifeboats, leaving the Titanic, so that women and children could be saved. And have we forgotten it was a man who let himself be nailed to the Calvary's cross? This isn't to say that women can't be heroic. I know many heroic women. It's simply to remind us that God made men the way they are because we desperately need them to be the way they are. Yes, a man is a dangerous thing. So is a scalpel. It can wound or it can save a life. You don't make it safe by making it dull. You put it in the hands of someone who knows what he's doing. If you've spent any time around horses, you know a stallion can be a major problem. They're strong, very strong, and they've got a mind of their own. Stallions typically don't like to be bridled, and they can get downright aggressive, especially if there are mares around. A stallion is hard to tame. If you want a safer, quieter animal, there's an easy solution: castrate him. A gelding is much more compliant. You can lead him around by the nose. He'll do whatever he's told without putting up a fuss. There's only one problem. Geldings don't give life. They can't come through for you the way that a stallion can. A stallion is dangerous, all right, but if you want the life that he offers, you have to have the danger too. They go together. I'm going to read the next part of the first chapter here, and then I'm going to give you my response to it. What's really going on here anyway? Let's say it's June 6th, 1944, about 0710. You are a soldier in the third wave onto the Omaha beach, D-Day. Thousands of men have gone before you, and now it is your turn. As you jump out of the Higgins boat and wait under the beach, you see bodies of the fallen soldiers everywhere, floating in the water, tossing in the surf, lying on the beach. Moving up the sand, you encounter hundreds of wounded men. Some are limping towards the bluffs with you, looking for shelter. Others are barely crawling. Snipers on the cliffs above continue to take them out. Everywhere you look, there are pain and brokenness. The damage is overwhelming. When you reach the cliffs, the only point of safety you find are squads of men with no leader. They are shell-shocked, stunned, and frightened. Many have lost their weapons. Most of them refuse to move. They are paralyzed with fear. Taking all of this in, what would you conclude? What would be your assessment of the situation? Whatever else would go through your mind, you would have to admit this is one brutal war. And no one would have disagreed or thought you odd for having said so. But we don't think so clearly about life. And I'm not sure why. Have a look around you. What do you observe? What do you see in the lives of the men that you work with, live by, go to church alongside? Are they full of passionate freedom? Do they fight well? Are there women deeply grateful for how well their men have loved them? Are their children radiant with affirmation? The idea is almost laughable if it weren't so tragic. Men have been taken out right and left. Scattered across the neighborhood lie the shattered lives of men and women who have died on a soul level from the wounds that they have taken. You've heard the expression, he's a shell of a man. They have lost heart. Many more are alive, but badly wounded, taking hits. They are trying to crawl forward, but are having an awful time getting their lives together. They seem to keep taking hits. You know others who are already captives, languishing in prisons of despair, addiction, idleness, or boredom. The place looks like a battlefield, the Omaha Beach of the soul. And that is precisely what it is. We are now in the late stages of the long and vicious war against the human heart. This book was written in 2001, before the war, before 22 veterans a day started killing themselves, before we started losing more firefighters to suicide than we lost on the job like we did in 2017, before we started losing more children to suicide, before the school shooting epidemic really became an epidemic. Men are losing heart. We are not raising our boys properly. We are not teaching them that it is okay to be courageous, that it is okay to be dangerous, and that it is okay to step outside the little safety bubble that we hover around. I encourage you, men and women, to read this book, Wild at Heart. It is absolutely, absolutely phenomenal. And I think that it will give a lot of you some heart here in this first week of school, sending your kids off to school. I appreciate you guys watching. Have a great Wednesday. David Serpa, on fire for the human soul. If you guys want to march with us, March for Post-Traumatic Growth, meet at the Temecula Duck Pond on September 1st at 1 o'clock. We are going to be meeting there with veterans, first responders, civilians, breaking down those barriers that between us that exist, because we're all dealing with a lot of the same struggles, and we can help each other break those down. There are going to be Purple Heart recipients there. There are going to be real, honest-to-God heroes. There's going to be some free music. It's going to be a good time. I hope you guys can make it. September 1st, 1 o'clock, the Duck Pond. We're marching to the Temecula VFW, and we're going to have a great time. I appreciate you guys watching. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.